Friedrich Nietzsche writes, "This new conscious civilization is killing the other, which, on the whole, has led but an unreflective animal and plant life. It is also destroying the doubt of progress itself. Progress is possible. I mean, it is hasty and almost unreflective to assume that progress must necessarily take place. But how can it be doubted that progress is possible? On the other hand, progress in the sense and along the lines of the old civilization is not even conceivable. If romantic fantasy employs the word progress in connection with certain aims and ends identical with those of the circumcised primitive national civilizations, the picture presented of progress is always borrowed from the past. The idea and the image of progress thus formed are quite without originality." From Nietzsche's book Human or to Human. When Friedrich Nietzsche says this new conscious civilization is killing the other, he could be referring to two possibilities. One possibility is that of modern Western civilization having taken the place of medieval Christendom. It perhaps would be quite fitting for Nietzsche to label medieval Christendom as having an unreflective animal and plant life, because he considers the Christian worldview as perhaps being a very monastic tradition which rejects certain aspects of life or ignores the importance of the humanly desires. But this could also refer to a postmodern civilization in relation to a modern civilization, whereby the postmodern civilization would bring about this new kind of consciousness amongst the people, where they would essentially have the will to power, whereas modern society fundamentally restricts people's will to power through various institutions and mechanisms. Modern Western civilization emphasized secular enlightenment and Judeo-Christian quote-unquote values, and a Greco-Roman and German heritage in comparison to medieval Christendom, which may have simply emphasized its partially Roman and mainly Christian heritage. But a postmodern civilization would be quite different, in that in a postmodern civilization, post the relevance and importance of the societal institutions and mechanisms, the individuals in this civilization would attempt to bring about their own meaning and values. He then goes on to write that it is also destroying the doubt of progress itself. Progress is possible. I mean, it is hasty and almost unreflective to assume that progress must necessarily take place, but how can it be doubted that progress is possible? We see within Western civilization, these ideas had developed of progress and of the importance of progress. And an important question that had arose was progress necessary? Was it a necessary aspect of the development of history and civilization? Or is it simply a possibility that may occur or may not occur? Is it even possible in the first place? See, with modern Western civilization, three key constituents of this new civilization was the Christian faith, the Roman heritage, and the Germanic identity. The Christian faith emphasized a linear view of time, leading up to the point where God's kingdom would be established on earth. Thus, this kingdom would bring about utopia, and thus you could understand that there was a movement towards betterment of the world, or a better place within this world. And so there was always the possibility of progress that was to be considered, but was it a necessity? In reality, progress is rationally possible and does occur normatively, as can be seen with the example of various different civilizations, not excluding two, but the primary example we can perhaps use would be the modern West. But to suggest that history must lead to progress, or that progress must occur, is a metaphysical claim which asserts that it is rationally and normatively necessary, either because it's a necessary component of history or it's an inevitable mechanism of the development of history. But ironically, the Enlightenment downplayed metaphysics and considered natural science or empirical observation as the root of all knowledge. How can this be proven scientifically though? The issue is that it's not really an empirical or objective outside world phenomena that you can observe. Marx suggested this kind of historical materialism whereby, through sort of certain economic factors or the organization of society economically, we were moving towards a better and better organization of society economically until we would reach the classless communist utopia. Or march of progress or progressivists, some of the sociologists from this camp, including Young and Wilmore and Aries, suggested that there was a bend towards history which was gradually tending towards the betterment of the conditions of the people at large. But we can't prove these things scientifically. They are metaphysical claims in nature, and the Enlightenment project and the various viewpoints following on from the Enlightenment project, by claiming to be scientific, fundamentally abandoned the one way, ironically, in which they could have proved this claim of theirs. Sociologists have tended to trace a chain of events from the Protestant Reformation to the Enlightenment, by which the rationalization of the world occurred and secularization occurred, and this kind of chain of progress that has been traced in the West occurred. The issue is that this is assuming that progress is the norm. The reality is that progress is very much the exception, and in reality, stagnation and decadence are the general norm of the human condition. If you look at the various civilizations of the world, and even modern Western civilization today, in recent years and in the coming years, perhaps will enter as well into a stage of decadence and stagnation. And arguably, Western culture in the past 60-70 years or so has stagnated. The West has no longer produced many great scientists and thinkers and philosophers like it once did, and many of the great civilizations of the world went through extensive periods of stagnation and decline. Although human development of technology and tools and knowledge has been exponential, and there's been a steady rate of growth across history, the reality is that has not necessarily translated to a better society and a better condition for the people. In fact, breakthroughs in technology and breakthroughs in knowledge and intellectual thought perhaps have led to more persecution and a worse off society. And for example, people who have made those breakthroughs themselves have been persecuted. So it's not necessarily the case that mere technological development necessitates progress, quote unquote. And what does qualify as progress anyways? A return to tradition and religion, for example, in a meaningless and nihilistic world that has been created by modernity, may in fact be progress in our context. In a medieval context, a breakaway from dogmatic institutions that restricted people's thoughts may have been considered progress in their context. And so understandings of progress are very much relative. And ironically, Nietzsche himself points out that we often look backwards at history to develop our notions of what should be considered and categorized as progress. This also brings about an interesting point of progress versus regress. At what point does our supposed movement forwards or our supposed new developments count as a regress and in fact a movement away from what is better? Nietzsche thought that the postmodern era would bring about men with their own values, that they would develop their own values and their own meaning. However, arguably, the opposite may occur, where in the face of an absolute collapse of societal meaning and institutions, we may return to tradition or this kind of neo-traditionalism to solve our existential crises. Thus, although progress in the human context is very much possible, it's simply a possibility. Its occurrence is at our hands, we as people may choose to bring about the conditions through which progress may occur, or we may fall into stagnation or decadence. History has shown us examples of progress, but it is not necessarily the norm of the human condition.